The galaxy had been peaceful for 3,000 years. The 12 species of the Galactic Concord had forgotten what war looked like. They traded with each other, shared knowledge, and solved their problems with words instead of weapons. Violence was something they read about in old history books, a shameful part of their past that they had left behind long ago. But there was one species that never forgot how to fight. When humans first appeared in the galaxy, they came from a dying world. Earth had been poisoned by war and pollution, and the last survivors fled in massive ships built for battle. These ships were covered in armor and filled with weapons that made the peaceful Concord species nervous. The humans were not like them. They carried the memory of violence in their blood. The Concord leaders met with the human commanders and made a deal. The humans could join the alliance, but they would serve a special purpose. They would become the sleeping guardians of the galaxy, protectors who would only wake when a threat too dangerous for diplomacy appeared. The humans agreed. They built a fortress on a frozen world called Erebus 7, far from the center of galactic civilization. There, they constructed underground chambers filled with cryogenic pods, machines that could keep a person alive while they slept for centuries. Thousands of human soldiers entered these pods. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were war giants, men and women whose bodies had been enhanced with metal and machine parts. Their bones were reinforced with titanium. Their eyes could see in the dark. Their reflexes were faster than any natural creature. They had been trained since childhood to fight, to survive, and to win at any cost. Beside the sleeping soldiers sat their warships, powered down but ready. The ships were massive, designed not for exploration or trade, but for destruction. Each one carried enough firepower to crack a moon in half. The Concord species looked at the sleeping humans and felt relief. They believed they would never need such barbaric protectors. War was over. Peace would last forever. They were wrong. Zara Hendricks sat at her console on the observation station Vigilance, watching the endless stream of data that flowed through galactic communication networks. She was 28 years old, young for a communications officer, but she had earned her position through hard work and sharp instincts. The station floated at the edge of Concord space, monitoring signals from distant systems. Most of her shifts were boring. She listened to trade agreements, scientific reports, and the occasional personal message that accidentally bounced through official channels. Nothing exciting ever happened. Tonight was different. The signal came from the Valkyrie home system, a prosperous world known for its beautiful floating cities and gentle people. At first, Zara thought it was a mistake, some kind of interference causing static in the message. She cleaned up the audio and played it again. Screams filled her headphones. The sound of weapons firing, explosions, and underneath it all, a voice repeating the same phrase over and over in the Valkyrie language. "They are harvesting us. They are harvesting us. They are harvesting us." Zara's blood turned cold. She checked the signal 3 times to make sure it was real. Then she pulled off her headphones and ran to find the station commander, Admiral. Takrul was an insectoid creature from the Kethari species. He stood 8 feet tall, with iridescent wings folded against his back and compound eyes that could see in multiple directions at once. He was old, even by his species' long standards, and he had spent his entire career believing that the galaxy would never see war again. Zara showed him the message. She watched his wings twitch as the screams played through the speakers. "Where did this come from?" he asked, his voice clicking in the way of his people. "The Valkyrie home system. It was sent 6 hours ago. I've been trying to contact them since, but there's no response. The entire system has gone dark." Takrul was silent for a long moment. His compound eyes focused on something far away, something in his memory. "The Devouring," he whispered. Zara had heard the name before, but only in old stories. The Devouring was a legend, a nightmare from 10,000 years ago. It was a swarm intelligence, a vast collective of organisms that traveled between stars, consuming entire civilizations for their biological material. They did not conquer worlds. They ate them. Every living thing, every plant, every animal, every thinking being was broken down and absorbed into the swarm. The Concorde's ancestors had fought the Devouring once, long ago. They had won, but barely. The old records said that 100 species had been wiped out completely before the swarm was driven into the void between galaxies. Everyone believed the Devouring was extinct. It cannot be, Zara said. That was 10,000 years ago. They were destroyed. They were driven away. Tekril corrected her. Not destroyed. We always knew they might return. We just hoped it would not be in our lifetime. More signals came in over the next few hours. 3 more systems had gone silent. Observation satellites at the edge of those systems transmitted final images before going offline. The images showed clouds of organisms, billions of them, descending on planets like a living storm. Cities were buried under writhing masses of teeth and tentacles. Oceans boiled as the swarm consumed everything. The Concorde Council met in emergency session. The 12 species argued for hours about what to do. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to run. A few suggested building new weapons, but their factories had not produced weapons of war in 3,000 years. They had forgotten how. Finally, an elderly diplomat from the Silthari species spoke the words that everyone was thinking but afraid to say. We must wake the humans. The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered the stories about humanity. They remembered the massive warships, the enhanced soldiers, the casual way humans discussed violence as if it were a normal part of life. They had kept the humans asleep for 3,000 years because they were afraid of them. But now they were more afraid of something else. The vote was unanimous. A message was sent to Erebus 7, to the frozen fortress where humanity's war giants slumbered in their pods. The message was simple. Wake up. We need you. Deep beneath the ice, machines began to hum. Lights flickered on in chambers that had been dark for centuries. Heating systems activated, slowly raising the temperature in thousands of cryogenic pods. The war giants were waking up, and the galaxy would never be the same. The cold was the first thing Lucas Gray felt when he opened his eyes. It was a deep cold, the kind that reached into your bones and made your muscles stiff and slow. He had felt it before, 800 years ago, when he first entered the cryogenic pod. Now he was feeling it in reverse, his body slowly warming back to life. Lucas was 52 years old, though his body had not aged a single day since he went to sleep. Silver lines traced across his face, the visible edges of the cybernetic implants buried beneath his skin. His eyes were not natural anymore. They were machines that could see heat, movement, and a dozen other things that normal eyes could not detect. His bones had been wrapped in titanium, and synthetic muscle fibers had been woven into his natural muscles, making him 3 times stronger than any unmodified human. He sat up in his pod and looked around the chamber. Thousands of other pods stretched into the darkness, their lights blinking as they began the awakening process. The air was cold and smelled like metal and chemicals. "Report," Lucas rasped. His voice was rough from centuries of silence. A figure approached him through the dim light. It was a Silthari, one of the bird-like species from the Concorde. She was small and delicate, with feathers of blue and gold covering her body. Her name was Priya, and she had been chosen to serve as the Concorde's envoy to the sleeping humans. She bowed low, a gesture of deep respect that the Silthari only showed to those they considered warriors. "Commander Gray," she said, "we require your assistance. The Devouring has—" "I know what the Devouring is," Lucas interrupted. He climbed out of his pod, his enhanced muscles remembering their purpose despite the long sleep. How many systems have fallen? 7. 3 more are under siege as we speak. Lucas nodded slowly. He walked to the main console at the center of the chamber and began entering commands. Around him, more pods were opening. Men and women were sitting up, shaking off the cold, their cybernetic implants glowing faintly in the darkness. The human fleet was stored in hangars beneath the ice, preserved alongside the soldiers who crewed them. Lucas activated the startup sequence for all of them. 12 dreadnoughts, the largest warships ever built by human hands. 40 destroyers, fast and deadly. 200 fighters, small but dangerous. The Concorde species had believed they would never need these weapons. They had been wrong. A pod near Lucas opened, and his second-in-command climbed out. Major Katie Santos was 35 years old when she entered cryogenic sleep, making her one of the youngest war giant commanders. She had been chosen not for her age, but for her mind. Katie could look at a battle and see patterns that others missed. She could predict enemy movements before they happened and find weaknesses that seemed invisible to everyone else. Her left arm was entirely mechanical, a weapon system disguised as a limb. The arm could transform into a plasma cannon, a blade, or a dozen other tools of destruction depending on the situation. She flexed her metal fingers, testing the joints, making sure everything still worked after 8 centuries. How bad? She asked, walking to stand beside Lucas. Bad enough that they woke us. Katie smiled, but there was no joy in it. Then let's remind the galaxy why they let us sleep. The awakening took 6 hours. Every war giant had to be checked, every implant tested, every weapon calibrated. The soldiers moved through their routines with practiced efficiency, their bodies remembering skills that their minds had temporarily forgotten. In the fleet hangars, the warships came to life. Their reactors hummed as they powered up, generating enough energy to light a city. Their weapon systems ran through diagnostic checks, confirming that they were ready to fire. Their engines warmed up, preparing to push the massive vessels through space at speeds that would seem impossible to the peaceful Concorde species. Lucas gathered his senior officers in the command center of his dreadnought, the Sleeping Bear. The ship had been his home before the long sleep, and it felt strange to walk its corridors again. Everything was exactly as he remembered, preserved perfectly by automated systems. Around the table sat the people he trusted most in the galaxy. Katie Santos, his tactical second, Dr. Hannah Price, the fleet's chief scientist, a woman so old that more of her body was machine than flesh. Lieutenant Commander Beth Torres, a physicist who had been recruited into the military because her genius was too valuable to waste on purely academic pursuits. And a dozen others, commanders and specialists who had given their lives to protecting the galaxy. Priya the envoy stood at the edge of the room, watching them with wide, nervous eyes. To her, these humans were terrifying. They spoke of war as casually as her people spoke of art or music. They discussed death the way others discussed the weather. Lucas pulled up a holographic display of the galaxy. Red markers showed the systems that had already fallen to the devouring. Orange markers showed the systems currently under attack. And spreading outward from those markers, like an infection, yellow zones showed the likely path of the swarm's expansion. The devouring is spreading faster than our ancestors recorded, Dr. Price said. She was examining the data with mechanical eyes that could process information faster than any natural brain. Either the swarm has grown since its last appearance, or it has evolved to consume more efficiently. Does it matter? Asked Captain Rico Vargas, commander of the destroyer Swift Justice. We kill them either way. It matters, Dr. Price replied, because if they have evolved, they may have developed defenses against the weapons our ancestors used against them. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. They might be walking into a fight they could not win. Lucas looked around the table at his officers. These were the most dangerous people in the galaxy. They had been built for war, trained for war, frozen specifically so they could fight wars that peaceful species could not. And now they were being asked to face an enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy 10,000 years ago. The Concord species have lived in peace for 3,000 years, Lucas said quietly. They have forgotten what it means to fight. They called us because they have no one else. If we fail, the galaxy dies. Every species, every civilization, every child who will never be born, because the swarm consumed their world before they had a chance to exist. He stood up, placing his hands on the table. We are war giants. We were made for this. We have slept for 800 years, dreaming of the next battle. Now that battle is here. Let's show the devouring what happens when you wake up humanity. The officers stood as one, their faces hard with determination. Whatever fear they felt, they buried it deep. They had a job to do. The human fleet launched from Erebus 7 6 hours later, breaking through the ice that had covered the fortress for centuries. 12 dreadnoughts, 40 destroyers, 200 fighters, all carrying the deadliest soldiers the galaxy had ever known. The Concord species watched them go and felt two emotions at once: hope, because the war giants might save them, and fear, because they had just unleashed something they might never be able to control again. The sleeping giants were awake, and they were angry. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Tindari system, and for a moment, every soldier on every ship fell silent at what they saw. The Tindari system had been home to 2 billion peaceful beings. They were gentle creatures, known across the galaxy for their beautiful music and their kindness to strangers. Their homeworld had floating cities and crystal spires that caught the light of their sun and scattered it into rainbows. Now, there was nothing left but the swarm, the devouring, filled space like a living cloud. Billions of organisms, each one the size of a small vehicle, moved together in perfect coordination. They had many shapes and forms. Some looked like giant insects with too many legs. Others were masses of tentacles and teeth. Still others were long and serpentine, their bodies covered in armor that glistened whitely in the starlight. They were beautiful in a horrible way. Commander Lucas Gray thought as he watched them on the tactical display. Perfect biological machines, designed by evolution or something worse to consume everything in their path. The Concord's peacekeeping fleet had arrived before the humans. 200 ships, crewed by the bravest soldiers the peaceful species could provide. They had tried to fight the swarm. Now their ships were debris floating in the void. Pieces of metal and bodies drifted through space, already being collected by swarm organisms for processing. The Concord fleet had not lasted an hour. All hands to battle stations, Lucas ordered, his voice calm and steady. Weapons free. Target the densest clusters first. Let's clear some space. The sleeping bear opened fire. The main cannon was a weapon unlike anything the Concord species had ever imagined. It channeled the power of a small star, focusing it into a beam of pure destruction that could cut through anything. The beam sliced through the swarm, vaporizing thousands of organisms instantly. For a brief moment, a hole appeared in the living cloud. Then the hole filled again as more organisms moved to replace the dead. The other human ships joined the battle. Plasma cannons and missile launchers and railguns unleashed fury upon the swarm. Explosions lit up space as millions of organisms died. But for every one that fell, 10 more seemed to take its place. They're adapting, Dr. Hannah Price reported from her science station. Her mechanical eyes were processing data faster than any natural brain could manage. Watch how they're shifting formation. They're learning our attack patterns. Lucas nodded grimly. Then we'll have to be unpredictable. Major Santos, take your team down there. We need samples if we're going to find a weakness. Katie Santos was already moving before he finished speaking. She ran to the shuttle bay, where 20 war giants waited in full combat armor. They were her strike team, the best of the best. Soldiers who had trained together for years before the long sleep. Among them was Private First Class Danny Reyes. He was barely 20 years old when he was frozen. The youngest soldier in the entire war giant program. He had been chosen because his reflexes were the fastest anyone had ever tested. But despite all his training, despite all his enhancements, Danny had never actually fought in a real battle before. He was terrified. But he would never let his fellow soldiers see it. The assault shuttle, Phoenix, launched from the Sleeping Bear and dove toward the swarm. The pilot, a woman named Maria Cole, flew with skill born from decades of practice. She weaved between swarm organisms, avoiding their grasping tentacles and snapping jaws, heading for the largest cluster near the planet's surface. "Landing zone is hot," Maria called back to the soldiers. "Very, very hot. Good luck." The shuttle's doors opened, and the war giants jumped. They fell through clouds of swarm organisms, firing their weapons as they dropped. Plasma rifles cut through alien flesh. Explosive rounds detonated inside creature bodies. Danny saw a soldier to his left get grabbed by a tentacle, and before he could scream, he was pulled into a mass of teeth. Danny fired into the mass until it stopped moving, but it was too late. His squad mate was gone. They landed on the surface of the dead world, on ground that had once been a beautiful garden and was now covered in organic slime. The swarm organisms surrounded them immediately, an endless wave of claws and teeth. "Stay tight," Katie shouted. "Watch your flanks. We need a live capture." The war giants formed a circle, facing outward, their weapons creating a wall of fire that the swarm could not breach. But the creatures kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their dead, reaching for the humans with mindless hunger. Danny's rifle overheated. He switched to his backup weapon, a plasma blade that extended from his forearm. He cut through organisms that got too close. Their blood, if it was blood splattering across his armor. A creature larger than the others broke through the line. It was covered in bony armor, with 6 legs and a mouth that seemed to be nothing but teeth. It lunged at Danny, faster than any living thing should be able to move. Danny's enhanced reflexes saved him. He sidestepped a charge and brought his blade down on the creature's neck. The blade cut through armor, through flesh, through bone. The creature fell, twitching. "Got one," Katie shouted. "Someone get me a containment field." One of the science specialists ran forward with an electromagnetic cage. They trapped one of the smaller organisms inside, a thing of tentacles and too many eyes. It screamed in frequencies that made Danny's head hurt, even through his helmet filters. "Fall back to the shuttle," Katie ordered. "We have what we need." The retreat was harder than the landing. The swarm seemed angry now, pressing harder against their lines. Another soldier fell, then another. Danny grabbed a wounded teammate and dragged him toward the shuttle, firing his rifle one-handed at the creatures that tried to stop them. They made it back to the Phoenix with 8 of their original 20 soldiers. The shuttle lifted off, its engines burning hot enough to incinerate the swarm organisms that clung to its hull dot above them. The Sleeping Bear continued its assault on the swarm. The main cannon fired again and again, carving temporary holes in the living cloud. But the swarm was vast, and even human weapons could only do so much dot as the Phoenix flew back to the dreadnought. Danny looked out the window at the planet below. Once it had been beautiful. Now it was being consumed layer by layer, as the swarm stripped it of everything that had made it alive. This was what they were fighting. This was what would happen to the entire galaxy if they failed. Danny gripped his rifle tighter and made a silent promise. He would not let that happen. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would help stop this nightmare dot in the science bay of the Sleeping Bear. Dr. Price examined the captured organism. It thrashed against its containment field, trying to escape, trying to find something to consume. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Terrible and beautiful. A perfect engine of destruction." She began her analysis, searching for a weakness, searching for something that humanity could use to win. The fate of the galaxy depended on what she found. 6 days passed, and Dr. Hannah Price did not sleep. She could not sleep. Her cybernetic systems kept her body functioning while her mind worked without rest, studying the captured swarm organism, searching for the secret that would save the galaxy. The creature fought against its containment field constantly. It never stopped trying to escape, never stopped reaching for something to consume. It screamed in frequencies that drove unenhanced listeners mad, sounds that seemed to come from nightmares made real. The other scientists could only work in short shifts before the noise became too much for their minds to handle. But Dr. Price was more machine than human now. She had given up most of her biological brain decades ago, replacing it with processors and memory banks that felt no fear and knew no exhaustion. She could listen to the creatures screaming for hours without flinching. While she worked, the war continued. The human fleet fought a running battle across 3 star systems, trying to slow the swarm's advance. They won small victories, destroying millions of organisms, but the swarm was vast beyond comprehension. For every creature they killed, it seemed like 10 more appeared. 15 systems had now fallen to the devouring. Billions of lives consumed, entire civilizations erased as if they had never existed. The Concord species were panicking, fleeing their homes in desperate migrations, hoping to stay ahead of the approaching nightmare. Commander Lucas Gray watched the tactical display in his command center and felt the weight of every death pressing down on him. He had trained his entire life for this moment. He had been built to fight exactly this kind of enemy. But nothing could have prepared him for the scale of the destruction. "Commander," a voice said behind him. It was Dr. Price, appearing in the doorway. She looked terrible, her mechanical body showing signs of strain that even her advanced systems could not hide. But her eyes were bright with something that might have been triumph. "I found it," she said. The senior officers gathered in the science bay, standing around the containment field where the swarm organism still thrashed and screamed. Dr. Price brought up holographic displays showing molecular structures and chemical formulas that meant nothing to most of the soldiers, but everything to the scientists. "The swarm communicates through chemical signals," Dr. Price explained. "Every organism in the swarm is constantly receiving and sending these signals, telling them where to go, what to consume, how to coordinate their movements. It is like a vast nervous system spread across billions of bodies." She pointed to one of the chemical formulas. "I have synthesized a compound that disrupts these signals. If we can introduce it into the swarm in sufficient quantities, their communication network will collapse. They will no longer be able to coordinate. They will turn on each other, attacking anything nearby, including their own kind." Major Katie Santos leaned forward, studying the formula. "How much do we need?" "Enough to fill a moon." The room fell silent. The scale of what Dr. Price was describing seemed impossible. They were a fleet of 12 dreadnoughts and a few dozen smaller ships. They did not have the facilities to produce that much of anything, let alone a specialized chemical compound. "We cannot manufacture that quantity," Captain Rico Vargas said. "Not in time. The swarm will consume another 10 systems before we could produce even a fraction of what we need." Lieutenant Commander Beth Torres had been quiet throughout the briefing, her brilliant mind working on the problem. She was a physicist, not a chemist, but she understood systems, and she understood how to break them. "We do not need to manufacture it," she said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. We can use the swarm's own biology against them. Everyone turned to look at her. Beth walked to the containment field, studying the organism inside. The swarm consumes biological material and converts it into more swarm organisms. Their bodies are processing factories. If we introduce the compound into one of their processing centers, the center that exists at the heart of every swarm cluster, they will manufacture it for us. They will spread it through their own distribution networks. Dr. Price's mechanical eyes widened as she processed the implications. That could work. If we could get the compound into the central processing node, the swarm would spread it themselves. They would poison their own communication network. How do we get the compound to the center of the swarm? Lucas asked. Our shuttles cannot survive long enough to reach it. Beth took a deep breath. We use one of our dreadnoughts. Fill it with the compound. Fly it directly into the heart of the swarm and detonate it there. The explosion would spread the compound through the entire cluster. That would require a pilot, Lucas said quietly. A volunteer. Everyone understood what was being asked. Whoever flew that ship into the swarm would not be coming back. The explosion that would save the galaxy would also kill the pilot. There was no escape, no rescue possible. It was a suicide mission. The room was silent for a long moment. Then a voice spoke from the doorway. I will do it. Danny Reyes stepped forward. He was still young, still scared, but something had changed in him since the surface battle. He had watched his friends die. He had seen what the swarm did to worlds and people. He understood now what it meant to be a war giant, to be a weapon built for a purpose. Katie Santos grabbed his arm. Private, you do not have to do this. You are too young. Let someone else. No, Danny said, meeting her eyes. I was 20 years old when they put me to sleep. I dreamed of being a hero. I dreamed of doing something that mattered. Let me do this. Let me be what I was born to be. Lucas looked at the young soldier for a long moment. He saw the fear in Danny's eyes, but he also saw the determination. Danny knew exactly what he was volunteering for. He knew he was going to die, and he was choosing to do it anyway. Are you sure? Lucas asked. Danny nodded. Someone has to fly that ship. Someone has to push the button. It might as well be me. I do not have a family waiting for me back home. I do not have anyone who will miss me. But maybe, if I do this, some kid on some planet will grow up because the swarm never reached them. Maybe they will have a family someday. Maybe they will live a life that I gave them. He smiled, and for a moment he looked even younger than his 20 years. That seems like a good enough reason to die. The dreadnought Thunderchild was chosen for the mission. It was the oldest ship in the fleet, the first dreadnought humanity had ever built. There was a certain poetry in using it for this final purpose. The crew stripped out everything that was not essential. They removed the weapons, the crew quarters, the life support systems for areas that would not be needed. In their place, they installed tanks filled with Dr. Price's compound, enough to poison the heart of the swarm. Danny spent his last hours saying goodbye. He walked through the sleeping bear, shaking hands with soldiers he had trained with, hugging the few who had become his friends. Katie Santos cried when she embraced him, something no one had ever seen her do before. You are the bravest person I have ever known, she told him. I am just doing my job, Danny replied. That is what war giants are for. The Thunderchild launched at dawn, though there was no sun to mark the time. Danny sat alone on the bridge, surrounded by empty seats where a crew should have been. The ship's automated systems would handle most of the flying. His only job was to push the button when the time came. The human fleet moved ahead of him, drawing the swarm's attention. They fought with everything they had, creating a path for the Thunderchild to follow. Ships exploded. Soldiers died. But they kept fighting, because they knew what was at stake. Danny flew through the chaos, dodging swarm organisms that tried to stop him. His ship took damage. Systems failed. Warning lights flashed across his console. But he kept going, pushing deeper and deeper into the heart of the swarm. Finally, he reached the center. The processing node was massive, a living structure the size of a small moon, pulsing with the life of billions of consumed beings. This was where the swarm converted its victims into more of itself. This was the heart of the nightmare. Danny looked at the button that would detonate his ship. His hand was shaking, Dot. He thought about the soldiers who had died to get him here. He thought about the billions who had already been consumed. He thought about the children on distant worlds who would never know his name but would live because of what he was about to do. He pressed the button. The last transmission from the Thunderchild was simple, spoken in a voice that was calm and steady despite everything. Tell them we were here. The explosion was visible across 3 star systems. A wave of light and chemical fire spread through the swarm, carrying Dr. Price's compound into every organism it touched. The swarm's communication network collapsed instantly, Dot, and then the swarm began to eat itself. Organisms that had worked together in perfect harmony suddenly saw their neighbors as food. They attacked each other with the same mindless hunger they had shown toward their victims. Billions of creatures turned on billions more, tearing and consuming in a frenzy of self-destruction. Within hours, 10 billion swarm creatures were dead, killed not by human weapons, but by their own kind. Danny Reyes had won. The battle was over, but the war was not completely won. Scattered remnants of the devouring fled into the dark spaces between galaxies, running from the poison that had destroyed their communication network. They would survive out there in the cold emptiness where no stars shone. They would heal. They would rebuild, but it would take millennia before they could threaten the galaxy again. The Concorde had time to prepare, time to build defenses, time to ensure that the next generation would be ready if the swarm ever returned. The human fleet gathered at Erebus 7 for the memorial. The frozen world felt different now, somehow less lonely. The ice that covered the fortress reflected the light of 100 Concorde ships that had come to honor the fallen. A gathering of species that had once feared humanity, but now understood why the war giants existed. 3,000 humans had died in the campaign. 3,000 soldiers who had given their lives so that trillions of others could live. Their names were carved into a wall of black stone that stood at the entrance to the cryogenic chambers. A permanent record of their sacrifice. Commander Lucas Gray stood before the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying across the frozen plain through speakers that broadcast to every ship in orbit. The surviving war giants stood in perfect formation behind him, their armor still showing the scars of battle. Among them stood Caddy Santis, her mechanical arm hanging at her side, her eyes red from crying. "We were created to be monsters," Lucas began, his voice steady despite the grief that pressed down on his heart. "The galaxy looked at us and saw weapons too terrible for civilized species to wield. They put us to sleep because they were afraid of what we might become if we stayed awake." He paused, looking out at the faces of his soldiers. "But we chose to be something else. We chose to be guardians. We chose to sleep so that others could dream, to wait in the darkness so that others could live in the light. We are not monsters. We are protectors. And today, we proved that to the entire galaxy." Behind the human soldiers, the Concorde representatives listened in silence. Admiral Tech Roll was there, his compound eyes glistening with moisture that might have been tears. Priya the Silthari stood beside him, her feathers ruffled by the cold wind. Representatives from all 12 species had come, each one carrying the gratitude of their entire civilization. Lucas continued his speech, his words echoing off the ice. Private First Class Danny Reyes was 20 years old when he gave his life to save the galaxy. He was scared. He was young. He had never seen real battle before this campaign. But when the moment came when someone had to make the sacrifice, he stepped forward without hesitation. Lucas's voice cracked slightly. The first sign of emotion he had shown. Danny once told me that he wanted to be a hero. He dreamed of doing something that mattered, something that would be remembered. Today, I promise him that his dream came true. His name will be spoken in every corner of this galaxy for as long as civilization exists. Schools will teach children about his courage. Parents will tell their sons and daughters the story of the young human who flew his ship into the heart of the swarm so that they could have a future. He straightened his shoulders, composing himself. We will sleep again. That is our purpose, our reason for existing. We will return to our pods and close our eyes, and the galaxy will continue without us. But we will be here waiting. If the devouring returns, if any threat arises that the peaceful species cannot handle, they will call us. And we will wake. That is the promise we made. That is what it means to be a war giant. That is what it means to be human. The ceremony lasted for hours. Every fallen soldier's name was read aloud. Stories were shared about their lives, their jokes, their dreams. The Concord representatives listened and learned, understanding for the first time that these warriors were not just weapons but people, individuals with loves and fears and hopes that would never be fulfilled. When the ceremony ended, the war giants began returning to their pods. One by one, they climbed into the cryogenic chambers, lay down on the cold platforms, and closed their eyes as the machines hummed to life around them. Katie Santos was one of the last to enter her pod. She paused at the entrance, looking back at the stars one final time. Somewhere out there, in the void between galaxies, the remnants of the devouring were fleeing. Somewhere out there, the worlds that Danny had saved were beginning to rebuild. See you next apocalypse, she whispered. Then she lay down, and the pod sealed over her with a soft hiss. Lucas Gray was the very last. He walked through the chambers, checking each pod, making sure every soldier was safely asleep. The weight of command never left him, even now. 3,000 of his people were dead. Thousands more had been wounded. The victory felt hollow in some ways, bought with blood and grief. But they had won. That was what mattered. They had done what they were built to do. He stopped at Danny's empty pod. The young soldier would never sleep here again. His name was on the wall now, carved in stone alongside the other heroes who had given everything. Thank you, Lucas said quietly. Rest well, Private. You earned it. Then he walked to his own pod and climbed inside. The cold embraced him like an old friend. He closed his eyes and let the machines carry him down into dreamless sleep. The lights in the cryogenic chamber dimmed. The humming of the machines faded to a whisper. Silence fell over the fortress beneath the ice, broken only by the soft rhythm of life support systems keeping thousands of hearts beating, thousands of minds dreaming, thousands of soldiers waiting for the next call. In the Concord chambers. Far away on the capital world, a new memorial was erected. It stood in the central plaza where all species gathered, a towering statue carved from black stone. The statue showed a human soldier in full battle armor, arm raised in eternal vigilance, eyes scanning the horizon for threats that might never come. The inscription at the base was simple, written in the languages of all 12 Concord species so that no one could claim ignorance of its meaning. They sleep so that we may live. They wake so that we may not die. Remember the war giants. Remember humanity. The Concord species resumed their peaceful lives. They traded and debated and created art and music. They raised their children and told them stories about the terrible days when the sky was filled with monsters. Some of those children had nightmares about the devouring, but their parents would hold them and tell them not to be afraid. The humans are watching over us, they would say. They are sleeping beneath the ice, waiting. If the monsters ever come back, the humans will wake up and fight them. They will protect us. They always have. They always will. And the children would calm down and fall asleep, comforted by the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, humanity's guardians were dreaming of the next battle. Years passed, decades, centuries. The galaxy healed. New civilizations rose on the worlds the devouring had touched. Life returned to places that had been stripped bare. The stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of the tiny beings that lived around them. But some things do not forget. In the darkness between galaxies, in the cold space where no light reached, something stirred. The remnants of the devouring had found each other. They had bred and multiplied in the endless night. They had learned from their defeat, evolved new defenses, developed new strategies. And slowly, so slowly that no observer would notice, they began to move toward the galaxy again. They remembered the taste of civilizations. They remembered the feast that had been interrupted. They remembered the humans who had poisoned them, the small creatures in metal shells who had taught them what pain meant. But most of all, they remembered fear. For the first time in 10,000 years, the devouring knew what it meant to be afraid of prey. And deep beneath the ice of Erebus 7, in their dreamless sleep, the war giants waited. They would be ready. They always were.